Good afternoon, and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. I'm Frank Bird, and I'm publisher of Inside Business and a proud member of the City Club of Cleveland. It is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker as part of the Business Leaders Series, Dr. Erica L. Groshen, Commissioner of the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. Time and time again, when you ask corporate leaders to name their biggest challenges, talent recruitment and retention lands in the top 5. We call it talent in some circles today, but in a previous era, it was workers and labor. Whatever you call it, the people who do the work of any organization are most organizations' most valuable asset. The Bureau of Labor Statistics was established in 1884 to track data and information on this valuable asset. Originally part of the Department of the Interior, by 1913, it became an integral part of the newly created Department of Labor. For more than 125 years, the Bureau of Labor Statistics has been a primary federal agency responsible for measuring labor activity, working conditions, and price changes in the economy. Hardly a day goes by when we don't hear from a news organization of another release of information from research from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. The monthly jobs report, the consumer price index, and the unemployment numbers. Of course, you get the picture. These are not idle research exercises. These are designed to support public and private decision making. In 2012, after receiving the nomination from President Barack Obama, Dr. Groshen said, and I quote, "Statistics are a public good. They are something kind of like roads that everybody uses and just helps everybody make better decisions, whether it's in their households or with policymakers or for business firms." In 2013, Dr. Groshen became the 14th Commissioner of the Labor of Statistics after receiving unanimous approval from the U.S. Senate. How did you do that?
It's a secret.
Okay. Prior to joining the Bureau of Labor Statistics, Dr. Groshen was a vice president in Research and Statistics Group at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Her research was focused on labor markets over the business cycle, containing wage rigidity and dispersion, regional economics, the male-female wage differential, and the role of the employers in labor market outcomes. Dr. Groshen has also served as an economist at the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland. Welcome back.
Thank you.
A visiting assistant professor of economics at Barnard College at Columbia University, and a visiting economist at the Bank for International Settlements in Switzerland. She earned a PhD in economics from Harvard University and a bachelor's degree in economics and mathematics from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Ladies and gentlemen, members and friends of the City Club, it is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Commissioner Erica L. Groshen.
So, good afternoon, everyone. I'm really deeply honored to speak at the City Club of Cleveland in the Business Leaders Series here. And I'm always happy to be back in Cleveland, where I spent 7 happy years working at the Cleveland Fed. My older son started school here. My younger son was born here. So we have a lot of happy memories. And as a former Ohioan, I'm really aware of the importance of this venue for conversation about the region's, indeed the nation's, hot, most important topics with the thought leaders in the country. So I want to thank Dan Mouthrop for the invitation. Thank you, Dan. And everyone here for coming out today to have this conversation. Today I want to talk to you about the Bureau of Labor Statistics and about the labor market in the country and in the region. And I want to also hear from you about how the BLS can do its job even better. So I really want this to be part of a dialogue. I'm going to start with an introduction to the BLS, tell you a little bit more about this great institution that I'm now part of, and then talk about what's up with the labor market, and then go on and talk about some of the challenges that I think remain in the economy today. So let me start by talking about our mission. And you just heard what it was. We, the 2,400 people of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, are the principal federal agency responsible for measuring 3 general areas: labor market activity, working conditions, and price changes in the economy. And we do that by collecting, analyzing, and disseminating essential economic information. And the whole reason for doing this is to support public and private decision-making. So we operate programs and surveys that measure employment and unemployment, compensation, worker safety, productivity, consumer spending patterns, and even how Americans spend their time. Simply put, though, it's all about helping Americans make decisions, because good decisions require good information. Without good information, people make what's technically called lousy decisions. So if we want good outcomes for our families, for our businesses, for our country, we need good information. But what is good information? I mean, what are good data? We actually have an answer for that. And that's embedded in what we call our data goals. When you think about what kind of information you need to make a decision, you need that information to be accurate. We have to get it right. And it has to be objective. It's got to be free from bias. It's got to be relevant. It's got to answer the questions that you need answered. And it has to be timely. You've got to get it in time to be able to make the decisions you need to make. And then finally, it's got to be accessible. You have to be able to find it and get it. And if you put those all together, they spell out aorta. And for those of you who don't know or don't remember your biology, the aorta is the largest artery in the human body. And we think of data as the lifeblood of democracy and free markets. I think it's pumping the needed information to where it has to go, particularly the economic brain. Okay? So to fulfill this mission, we have to continually adapt our programs to meet the challenges of a rapidly changing economy, both in how we collect the data, but also in what we're measuring. And we also have to continually improve the dissemination and accessibility of our data so that we can reach the greatest number of people. Because I'm going to reiterate something I've said before, data really are a public good, like roads and like clean air. We need it. Without good data, discussions and negotiations throughout the economy would be more contentious and less productive. I mean, there's a reason why we were the first statistical agency created in the U.S. In 1884, there was a lot of industrial unrest. And when the workers and the employers were at odds with each other, they weren't just fighting over their share of the pie, they were fighting over what size the pie was, because there wasn't a set of information for that. And the policymakers, your elected officials at the time, decided, gee, if at least there was a common set of facts that the two sides could agree on, they'd be much closer to be able to reach a conclusion, to reach an agreement with each other. So the BLS's Consumer Price Index, think about that. Without that, we'd all be arguing about how to adjust Social Security over time, right? And many commercial and long-term and labor contracts wouldn't have an objective measure of inflation to peg changes to. They'd be renegotiating every month or every quarter. Right? And more mistakes would be made. So we at the BLS take that very seriously, because we know that if we made a mistake of 1/10 of a percentage point in the CPI, Social Security benefits paid out would either be, the federal government would be paying either $1 billion too much, or beneficiaries would be receiving $1 billion too little, right? So we know what we do is important. We work very hard at it. It's a very serious responsibility. And that's just the tip of the iceberg of the things that some of the measures that we produce affect. Without an objective BLS measure of local unemployment, each state or area could apply its own definition. And then how could you compare across states? How could you compare across time to know which areas are in most distress? And how would you allocate aid? Right? So the bottom line is that those of us who work at the BLS, the 2,400 colleagues that I have there, who, by the way, are the most dedicated data nerds you will ever find anywhere, our job is to get the best we can for the nation's data dollar. We're the steward of an important part of the nation's data dollar, and so we have a big responsibility. And my consistent message, and that of all of the leadership at the BLS, is that that's our job, that we have to get the best we can for our share of the data dollar. So how is it that we produce our high-quality data? Let me tell you one very key component, and that's voluntary cooperation. Our first commissioner of labor statistics decided that forevermore most BLS surveys would have voluntary, not mandatory, participation in them, right? And that, he argued, would make sure that we had a good relationship with our respondents. And I think it's worked. The BLS achieves extraordinarily high participation rates in its surveys, much higher than any private sector firm, because we have a special bond built on trust with the American people. They entrust us with what at times is sensitive data. They trust us to keep that secure, and they trust us also to use it to produce statistics that they then trust to inform their decisions. Right. Confidentiality, then, is a very important part of what we do. The information provided to us is used only to produce statistics that describe or analyze the characteristics of groups or places, never to characterize individuals, households, or specific organizations. And the quality and the accuracy of the data produced at BLS, then, depends on our gaining the trust and the data from the respondents, because what we produce depends on the number and the diversity of the businesses and the households that are included in our surveys. Every time someone doesn't respond, we impute a response. The truth is better than an imputation. Even though we're good at imputation, we'd much rather have the truth. So we carefully construct all of our measures to minimize reporting burden, so that when we ask someone for their participation, the burden is as small as possible. And we keep our sample sizes small enough so that we don't have to ask too many people, right? So for those of you who participate in BLS surveys, I want to take this moment and say thank you. Thank you from BLS, and thank you from all of your fellow citizens, because you're performing an important public service. And I hope you feel better every day when you know that you've answered a BLS survey. It's important. And for those of you who are going to be asked in the future, I hope that you will agree to participate and encourage others to participate too, and make it a badge of honor. We will never tell anybody that you participated or didn't participate, because that would breach the confidentiality to which we're pledged. But you can tell people that, and we hope you will. Okay. Now I'm going to address one other important thing. How do we earn the trust? How do we earn people's trust in what we put out? Let me give you two examples of our values in action. You remember the proverbial question, is the glass half full or half empty? The BLS has an answer to that, right? According to the BLS, this glass is an 8-ounce glass that contains 4 ounces of liquid, right? And that's really how we perform our work. It's up to you to decide the full or empty part. We give you the measurements, okay? The other way that we do this is that we strive for impartiality amongst our users. We announce all of our results at preset times, often a year in advance. We'll tell you when we're going to put something out. And then we provide equal access to that data on release. Nobody gets it first or in a special way. All right. So how is it that businesses use BLS data? I have here only a partial list of the many, many ways that BLS data is used by businesses. You can kind of read through on your own. Let me highlight just one of them, the third from the bottom. One of the ways that BLS data is used is to inform plant locations, sales, and purchase decisions using our current employment statistics, that's payroll numbers by area and by industry. Also, using our quarterly census of employment and wages, which is very detailed information on employment hours, not hours, but employment and earnings by area. Also, our occupational employment survey and our local area unemployment statistics program. So we can give very detailed regional information that informs companies on where they might want to locate, where they might want to buy things, and where they might want to aim their sales activity. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. But we have more customers than just businesses. Families and students are actually users of our biggest selling product, which is the handbook which is the Occupational Outlook Handbook. This compendium of descriptions of over 800 occupations gives wages, career paths, descriptions of all of the major possible occupations that a person can choose. High schools, colleges, junior colleges use it. Their counselors use it. The students and families use it. Prisons use it. It's available to all without cost. It's prepaid by your tax dollar. But advocacy groups use it to understand what's going on with the target population that they're looking at. Policymakers and researchers use it for the Federal Reserve's dual mandate, employment, and price stability, right? Both of those are measured by the BLS. State and local governments use it to measure entrepreneurship or to assess economic development opportunities. So there are a lot of users. And where do they get BLS data? Where can you get BLS data? Come to bls.gov. We have an extensive customer service guide there, which will give you the phone numbers and email addresses for all of our experts. You can call them up directly and ask them about the data that they produce. They love to talk to users, so don't be shy. We'd love to hear from you. BLS is also on Twitter. We have over 30,000 subscribers now, so if you want the latest release from us or know what our latest research is, you can subscribe to our Twitter account. Every day we put out the Economics Daily, which is a chart, a quick chart from one thing that we've put out with a couple of lines that'll keep you up to date with what we've been producing lately. You can read my blog, The Commissioner's Corner, on the website. Where I describe a lot of our recent activities and talk about speeches. This one will probably be featured in some way or another on there. We have a publication called Spotlight on Statistics, which is topical. It combines information from across a number of our different programs. And for regional information, we have a brand new set of regional pages, which is a very handy way of organizing information by the region you might be interested in. So all of these are on our website. It's all to help you, everything's there to help you make better decisions. So check it out often. Now, let's talk about what we've been learning about what the labor market has been doing lately. So we're collecting this information, we're putting it all out. What's it telling us? Where are we in the recovery? Well, the number of jobs in the U.S. now exceeds pre-recession levels. This chart compares the this last recession, the Great Recession, to the recession immediately previous to it, the 2001 recession. The blue line on top is the 2001 recession, and the red line below is the 2007-2009 recession. And the two shaded areas compare the length of those recessions. We've lined them up. So the dark area is the length of the 2001 recession, and the broader part is the 18 months that was the 2007-2009 recession. So the Great Recession lasted 18 months. And during that time, we lost 8.7 million jobs. But as of April 2014, 50 months after the trough, payroll employment recovered and surpassed its January 2008 peak. And so over the last 12 months, then, employment expanded by a further 3 million jobs. So we are 12 months and 3 million jobs beyond the recovery point. And if you want to compare that to the last recession was much more shallow. It started off looking about the same, but then Lehman Brothers and the collapse of the financial industry threw us further and deeper into the recession. All right. Then the last recession, of course, had a long jobless recovery period and started to recover. And really the pace of job growth for both of them, once recovery started, was fairly similar. This has been fairly widespread across the country. All states have added jobs since the employment trough in February 2010. But the darkness in this chart shows you how many jobs have been gained, and what you can see is that there are some pretty striking differences in the percentage of jobs that have been gained since then. And these reflect both how severe the downturn was in each of those states and the long-term growth trends in each state. Now, those statistics were based on a payroll survey, going to firms and asking them how many jobs they have on their payrolls. We also learn a lot about the labor market by going to households and asking them about what everybody in their household is doing. This chart shows you the unemployment rate, which comes from the current population survey, a monthly survey of over 60,000 households. By the way, that payroll survey surveys 588,000 establishments every month and returns information for you on it within 2 weeks. The household survey is smaller, but it gets information on people who aren't employed. And to really understand the labor market, you need to know what's going on with people who aren't employed. Anyway, the unemployment rate peaked at 10% in October 2009 and has been going down fairly steadily since then. It's still 1 percentage point above the pre-recession level, which was 4.4%. So we're now at 5.4%. That's a huge decline from where we were before, but we're still 1 percentage point above its pre-recession low. And as of April 2015, the number of unemployed persons was 8.5 million, essentially unchanged over the month. Turning now to the region. Unemployment rates not only vary by state, but they vary within state. And this shows you unemployment rates by county in Ohio. The current unemployment rates in Ohio range from a low of 3.6% for Delaware and Mercer counties to a high of 9.6% in Monroe County. So that's a pretty wide range. Overall, though, the state rate has fallen by 1.1 percentage points over the year. And the counties with the largest over the year unemployment rate declines include Monroe, which had a decline of 4 percentage points, Pike, which had a decline of 2.1 percentage points, and Clinton, which had a decline of 2 percentage points. So we're having some big declines in unemployment rates in Ohio. If you turn to metropolitan statistical areas, unemployment has been declining pretty steadily in Ohio, and the 3 largest metro areas track that pattern fairly closely. These data are not seasonally adjusted, which is why you see the zigzags over time. You know, we have December, for instance, has a very strong seasonal pattern, as does January, and so you see these fluctuations. The rates for the state and for all 3 areas have returned or nearly returned to where they were prior to the recession. The Ohio's rate was 5.4% in March 2015 compared to 5.5% in March 2007. So we're really pretty close to being back. And that's true for all of the MSAs. It's a little hard to pick up, but if you look for Cleveland there, you'll see that it had a less cyclical experience than Ohio and than the states as a whole. The increase in unemployment for Cleveland wasn't as strong as for the rest of the state and for the other MSAs, and then the decline during the expansion hasn't been quite as strong either. 3 counties in the Cleveland metro area, though, have unemployment rates that are below the U.S. average. Now, here I'm comparing to 2014 annual averages to get away from the different seasonal patterns. With the 5 county area, the 5 counties in the Cleveland MSA have unemployment rates that range from 5.1% in Geauga County to 6.6% in Lorain County. And 3 of these counties, as I have had rates that were below the U.S. average of 6.2% over 2014. But all 5 counties experienced rate declines over the past year. For instance, there was a 0.9% percentage point decline in Lorain County and 7-point decline, 0.7 percentage point declines in Cuyahoga, Geauga, Lake, and Medina counties. All right, so the recovery that we've seen has been pretty similar in terms of numbers of jobs across the main metro areas in the state of Ohio. The one that stands out, though, is Columbus, which is the green line there. The losses in Columbus were less pronounced, and the gains have been much more consistent over the past 4 years. So Columbus has been having a stronger recovery than the rest of the large metro areas. Within Cleveland, we can also, and we can do for all our metro areas, but let me focus on Cleveland since we're here. We can take a look at which industries have been growing fastest or slowest. And this chart shows you the 2 fastest growing industries and the 2 slowest growing industries in the Cleveland metro area. The blue one, which is highly seasonal, that's the zigzagging you can see, is arts, entertainment, and recreation. And that's an area where Cleveland has been seeing most growth. The green one is management of companies and enterprises, less seasonal, showing growth. The declines have been in mining, logging, and construction. That's the red line, the zigzaggy red line. That's around here, that's mostly construction. Okay, and information is the yellow line. That's declining. And for those of you who tend to think of information as just high tech, you have to realize it has a combination of the old tech information activities such as book publishing and newspapers, as well as the high tech part. Okay. So, I've told you by and large where we are. What kind of challenges is this posing for the economy? So what's missing to make us to give us a more robust labor market? Because I've told you that we've come a long way back, and we have, but is there any more ground to make up? Let's take a broader look at the margins on which the labor market can improve. And what I'm going to ask you to do is a bit of a thought experiment. Think of running a company during the depths of the recession. Demand has dropped off, right? Your customers are no longer buying things from you that they used to buy, right? And you've got to adjust. You want to stay afloat, right? So what do? You do things like cutting hours. You eliminate shifts if you have more than one shift. You cut work weeks. You furlough people for parts of the month. You may lay off workers entirely. You may defer investments, stop investing entirely. Right? You're doing a lot of things to cut your costs so you can stay afloat. Then demand returns. What do you do first? Well, the first thing you do is you stop laying off workers. Right? And then when demand returns a little more, you start increasing people's hours. Right? And then when you've got hours and furloughs gone, you may start hiring back workers. And then things get a little better, you may invest. Right? And so there's a bit of a cascade down into the recession and a cascade as you return. So when we measure number of payroll jobs and when we measure the unemployment rate, we get a good, quick snapshot of economic conditions. But the labor market is multidimensional, and we can measure activity in a lot of different ways and understand where there may be pockets of slack in the economy that go beyond what our headline measures pick up. Right. And BLS spends a lot of time measuring those pockets of slack as well as we measure the headline numbers. So let me give you a bit of a scorecard here that mirrors what I was talking about. This is my own little recovery margin scorecard, all right? And I've ordered them kind of notionally, but I don't want to be rigid at all about it, from the ones that companies might do first to the ones that they would do last. So say the first thing a company might do is stop laying off workers. Okay, so I'm going to go through them and look at measures that the BLS has of each of these kind of these margins, and say, where are we in recovery for each one of these margins? So start with layoffs. On the layoff margin, we're complete, right? We are now back to very normal layoff rates in the economy, back to pre-recession layoff rates. You can see that in UI initial claims, which actually we don't produce, but we certainly track. And in our job openings and labor turnover survey, layoffs and discharges. How about hours? Well, we've seen a lot of recovery of hours. Average weekly hours is back up to pre-recession highs, right? But it's not entirely complete because we do have, in the household survey, we pick up a number of people who would like full-time jobs who are still working at part-time jobs. We've had most full recovery on hours that have been cut by the employers temporarily. Those are mostly replaced. But what hasn't been replaced are people who would prefer to have a full-time job who find themselves in a part-time job. We've certainly, going down to the third line, we've seen more hiring in lots of our surveys of jobs. But in one of our surveys, we can distinguish between hiring that's by continuing firms and by new firms, by firm births, and we see that the hiring by firm births continues to be very depressed, the hiring by newly formed firms. So we're mostly recovered, but not hiring by new firms. The other thing as the labor market improves, then employers who, at the depths of the labor market, if they had a job, had a ton of people outside applying for the job and could be very selective about who they chose. When the labor market gets better, they're going to no longer have quite as many applicants, and they can't be quite as selective as they were before about who they're going to choose. So how about less selective hiring, right? What we're finding is that there's some evidence that employers have indeed become, and I would say that this is a good thing, certainly for the workers, are now relaxing their standards to allow a broader range of employees. And we can pick this up in the fact that the number of people who have been out of work for over 6 months is declining in our unemployment statistics. The participation rate is a measure of how many people choose to work rather than not work in the economy or look for work. The participation rate declined very dramatically during the recession. It has stopped declining, but it hasn't turned up yet. So we've at least achieved a flattening. It's been flat for about a year, but it hasn't turned up yet. For a really healthy labor market, we have people moving around amongst jobs a lot. They're looking for their next opportunity. Employers are poaching workers from each other to try and get the best qualified person. Right? People are willing to quit their jobs even if they don't have one lined up, or they quit because they found another job with another company. Our quit rate is now approaching pre-recession levels. It's taken a long time to recover, but it's approaching pre-recession levels. So that's a good sign. Probably has there are probably a lot of pent-up quits there that need to happen, but we're in the right direction. How about compensation? That's something we would need for a really strong labor market, high compensation growth. That we're not seeing. Right. Average hourly earnings have been growing at a rate of around 2% for the last few years, have seen no increase. We have one measure where we're starting to see a little bit of a pickup, but otherwise they're all pretty flat. So this is an area where there's still more margin for recovery. So I hope that gives you a better rounded picture of the way I see the labor market, where the labor market is. We have come a really long way, but there are still some pockets of slack, some more productive power that can be drawn in to the economy to push us even further. So in closing, let me remind you that free markets and democracy require trustworthy data, the kind that I've been talking about, the kind that BLS produces. And let me also encourage you to use BLS data in all of your decision making, because we think that will help you make better decisions, and that's what we produce it for. That's why we do it. So, and finally, I want to reiterate my thanks to everybody who's ever participated in a BLS survey or asked the people who work for them to participate in a BLS survey. You're doing a public service. That's really important. And then let me thank you also for taking the time to listen to me. Thank you very much.
Today we are enjoying a Business Leader Forum featuring Dr. Erica L. Groshen, Commissioner of the Bureau of Labor Statistics. We encourage you to organize your questions for our speaker now and remind you that your questions should be brief and to the point. We welcome all of you here and those joining us via our primary media partners, 90.3 WCPN, WBIZ PBS, 104.9 WCLV Idea Stream, or one of the many radio stations across the region and the country that carry the City Club programs. Television broadcasts of the City Club are made possible by Cleveland State University and PNC. Our live webcast is supported by the University of Akron. Be sure to join us next Thursday, May 28th, as we welcome Timothy S. Keene, Director of the Office of Budget and Management for the State of Ohio, for a discussion on the Ohio budget process. For more information about our upcoming and past forums, please visit us online at cityclub.org. Today, we welcome guests and hosted tables and also our sponsors for the Business Leader Series. First, we have Huntington Bank, Falls Communications, Fredonia, Inside Business, Level 7, Life Bank, and Mead and More. We thank you for all of our support. Please, a round of applause. Now it's time to return to Commissioner Groshen for our traditional City Club question and answer period. We welcome questions from everyone, including guests. Holding the microphone today is Director of Programming, Stephanie Janskis. Please, the first question.
Commissioner Groshen, thank you so much for joining us today. Throughout your discussion of the BLS and of the labor market, you've been talking about the importance of accurate statistics. And the official measure of unemployment in the United States is the U3 unemployment rate. For those that don't know, it doesn't include marginally attached workers who work part-time or workers that are discouraged and not looking for work. So is that an area that the BLS can help with, come up with a more accurate measure, perhaps making the U6 the official unemployment measure in the United States?
You ask a question that often comes up, so thank you. Well, first of all, I'm glad that you acknowledge the fact that the BLS actually does produce 6 measures of labor underutilization, one of which is the official unemployment rate. So we do produce the U6 as that you mentioned. The reason that we prefer or we consider U3 to be the official rate is twofold. One, it's most comparable internationally. It's also most comparable over time. We've been doing it for longest, right? And then there's some other elements too. It's also perhaps the most objective of the measures. I mean, when you ask someone who's unemployed, who's out of the labor force, why they didn't look for work, and they say because they're discouraged, it's a little less objective than asking someone, did you actually look for work in the past 30 days? Right? So we think it gets closer to some action that we can measure. Nevertheless, we report them all because for different purposes, one may be a better measure than the other. For most of the time, people are looking at the unemployment rate as a measure of the business cycle. Right? And for that purpose, frankly, all 6 of the measures of utilization rate are most of the time telling you the same story. If you just look at them on a graph, they go up together and they go down together. So if you're looking for the path of the business cycle over time, really any of them will tell you the same basic story. So I encourage, and all my colleagues do, encourage people to look at all of the measures and make sure that you're looking at the one that answers the question best, and we're happy to produce them all. Thanks.
Yes, thank you for a very interesting presentation. I wonder if you could tell us something more about how you draw your samples and how you've made this transition from, I assume, paper surveys at one time to, I assume now, internet-based surveys. Great questions. We do, as I've mentioned, we do 2 general kinds of surveys. We do household surveys and establishment surveys, and we do them both because they're 2 different lenses that if you look through both of them, you'll get a fuller picture of what's going on in the labor market. The household surveys are conducted for us, most of them by the Census Bureau, and they draw their samples from the registers that they develop as a result of the decennial census. And those are residence-based surveys, so they're not based on phone lists, they're based on places of residence. We do call them, the Census Bureau calls them on our behalf, but only after they've been given the phone number by the resident of the house, as this is the most convenient way to reach me. Okay. The establishment surveys are mostly drawn from a sample that we maintain in partnership with the states that are based on unemployment insurance records.
right? And that's our sample frame, which we call the Quarterly Census of Employment and Wages. And we choose establishments from UI accounts in each of the states. And the transition from paper to electronic is proceeding. We are definitely moving away from paper in all of our surveys. But remember when I said we minimize burden and we make it as easy to report as possible? For most of our establishment surveys, we offer a range of ways to respond because we want the old-fashioned and the quirky establishments to still respond to us. And some of them want to punch that number into the phone because that's the way they've always done it, or they want to fax us something, or they want to mail something back. So even as we move towards more and more high tech, we have to maintain the high touch too.
Hello, I just wanted to first say thank you very much. As a user of your data and services, you have excellent customer service and you have very knowledgeable people, as you said. So
music to my ears. I hear it often and love it every time, but thank you.
My question is, recently the Department of Commerce hosted a data advisory council where they brought in public actor and private actors and discussed data uses. And there was a lot of really interesting things about public-private partnerships and making data more accessible. Is the BLS going to do anything like this or participate in something like this?
We had representatives there at the Commerce meeting, so we have an ongoing Data Users Advisory Council. It meets twice a year, and that's been very useful to us in terms of advising and moving forward. We have a lot of consultation on a regular basis. Recently, actually, Jack Kleinhens, who helped arrange to have me come here, also helped us bring in 12, actually it was over 20 of the chief economists from industry associations to visit the BLS, and we've decided that we're going to continue that on an annual basis as long as interest continues. So we have a continual process of reaching out, and we learn so much from it. It's very important to what we do. In terms of public-private partnerships, I think that's a direction we will need to go in as we look for ways to lower the reporting burden and to bring in as much big data as we can into our operations. Thanks.
There was a very striking example you gave of the impact of the CPI on government expenditures and so forth, and so I can imagine how, from a political standpoint, there'd be a lot of interest in what that number is. To what extent is the process of determining the CPI set in stone, and to what extent is it subject to some type of qualitative judgment type of differences? And in addition to that, is there any type of insurance to exclude political influence from the process?
That's a really good question. So, as statistical agencies, we are independent of our home department's political activities, right? So I am the only presidential appointee at the BLS, and I am appointed for a fixed term, not at the pleasure of the president. And I see no number before it is final. Everybody. We also, the BLS and the other statistical agencies operate under a set of guidelines that are overseen by the Office of Management and Budget that are intended to make sure that we are not subject to political influence in both how we decide to create our statistics and in how we deliver them or collect them or any of that. So the judgments that we make about what to measure and how to measure it are apolitical. However, we provide information to the policymakers, and it's up to them to decide how to use what we produce. And it's also up to them to decide which of our activities to fund or not to fund. But that's done in a very public way. Right. So, for instance, there have been discussions about whether the CPI should be, whether Social Security benefits should be adjusted using another measure of inflation. Right? We produce a number of them. There was a proposal to use the change CPI rather than the CPIU, which is what is actually the CPIW, which is what we're using right now. And that is a decision to be made by the policymakers. We can only advise them on what we think is the best measure, why we produce it, and how we do it. But it is up to the policymakers to decide which of those measures to use.
Thank you again for coming to Cleveland. I'm also a big supporter of your activity. So,
thank you.
I had two questions that relate to efforts that you may be planning or you might be considering in the future. One is, what kinds of efforts do you see the BLS making to capture the changes in the kind of work that's being done? And in particular, I mean the move toward more non-standard work arrangements, toward franchising, toward subcontracting, towards temporary work, so that we don't have the same kind of workforce that we did, and we need additional data to capture more of that. Mm-hmm. And then secondarily, do you see any likelihood of the BLS moving forward to try and capture more data on wage theft, and whether it's misclassification, overtime, minimum wage, whatever it might be? Much of the data that we do see on this is not official government data because it doesn't seem to exist to the degree that it should. So I'm wondering if you have any plans or ideas of what you might do in that area. Thank you.
Great questions. So the first one, in the President's budget proposal for 2016, there would be funding for the BLS to conduct what we call the Contingent Worker Survey. The last time we conducted this was in 2005, and we would very much like to do this again. It's a supplement to the household survey, and it captures many forms of non-traditional work relationships. So we're very much hoping that that will be funded, and because we'd really love to do that. With funding, we can do that. Your second question is a little bit trickier. Asking people, whether it's firms or households, about their illegal activities is always a very difficult proposition, right? You can promise people all the confidentiality in the world, but you're always going to have a question with that. So you're always going to have difficulty knowing exactly what you've gotten as a response. So we, by and large, shy away from directly asking people about illegal activity. I'd say that the enforcement divisions that are part of the Department of Labor, like the Wage and Hour Division, they are thinking very hard about how best to try and get a handle on those elements. And so you might want to talk to them about what their plans are. But right now we don't have anything written into the President's budget for 2016 on that particular item.
Thank you for coming to Cleveland. The gentleman already asked about the U6 unemployment rate. So you mentioned workforce participation briefly, but didn't mention that it's already at a 50-year low. I wanted your thoughts on generous unemployment benefits being a disincentive to work, Obamacare's impact on the workforce. And I was really surprised to hear you say that it's a good thing employers are lowering their workforce standards instead of employees bringing their skills up. Could you comment on that?
Sure. Okay. On the first one, it's actually pretty easy for me to answer. The BLS does not take a position on whether those policy elements are what's driving the lower labor force participation. Although I have to note that there's been a lot of research on this, and the bulk of the decline seems to be due to demographic factors. Maybe not all of it, but a lot of it is aging workforce and those elements. Okay. So then the second part of your question. Uh-oh, now I've lost it. One word.
Primarily like Obamacare's impact on the workforce
the lowering standards. Yeah, lowering standards. There's a balance in standards, right? If to use this absurd example, taxi drivers, when the economy is really bad, you get PhDs driving taxis, right? And an employer say, hey, great, I've got these PhDs driving taxis, right? And they might expect that they're going to get very highly educated people driving taxis. But then when the economy improves, people with the better degrees have better opportunities, they leave. If the employer still continues to expect that they're going to get people with MBAs and PhDs driving taxis, that's they're probably they essentially need to lower their standards, and they can still probably get just as good a taxi driver as they had before. Right? So sometimes you can demand skills that that you actually don't need for production, and it's a sign of a strengthening labor market when employers have to consider that. Are they going to raise their wages in order to maintain the skills that they were able to get with lower wages, or are they going to lower their skill demands? And that's a business decision on the part of the employer. But it does signal a strengthening labor market when they have to do one or the other. Yeah.
Yes, Commissioner Groshen, appreciate your comments today. I wanted to get some insight regarding government employment and reduction in government employment as it is reported by your organization.
Yeah.
You noted Columbus as having a growing economy. I wanted to know how do you guys measure the impact of institutional and state government on labor statistics?
Mm-hmm. Well, here, I actually have a chart here. Oh, that was it. Okay, so this is a kind of complicated chart. It shows you the red lines are what happened to each of these major industry groups during the recession, and the green bars shows you what happens to those industry groups in terms of number of jobs during the recovery. And for most of the industry groups, you had losses during the recession and then gains during the recovery. And most of the losses were concentrated near the top of the chart, which is the goods-producing sector, construction and manufacturing, mining and logging. And most of the gains are concentrated in the lower part, which is the service sector. But if you look at the very bottom, you'll see government. And government tends to be counter-cyclical, that we have an increase in government jobs during recessions because we have benefits and things like that increase, and we have counter-cyclical spending during the recession. And then during the expansion, sometimes we'll have flattening. What you can see is that in this recession, we had a lot of, down at the bottom, what you see is that in this recession, we had a very small increase in government jobs during the recession, and we've had a large decrease in government jobs during the expansion. So that's been unusual and likely a drag on the economy, certainly in the short run.
Today at the City Club, we have been enjoying a forum featuring Dr. Erica L. Groshen, Commissioner of the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This forum is now adjourned.